Hello students, welcome aboard virtually because we are here to make it easy. Yes, while you sip your coffee and plug in your earphones, we shall take you through this wonderful journey of interesting chapters. Let me bring it to your notice. I shall not be going bilingual. What do I mean by bilingual? I mean there will be no Hindi from my end, no Hindi explanation. A few words here and there. Yes, you shall get it. Try and understand why is that so. Well, what you get the explanation, the language in which you get the explanation. For example, if I'm going to explain in English, it is going to be way easier for you to write down your answers, to frame your answers, because that understanding will be in English. It will be difficult for you to translate from Hindi to English. So try and understand. It's going to make it way easier for you. Now, we shall go through every chapter, every line, every word. Yeah, and I shall be putting it in very simple terms. I shall be bringing it down to the layman's English to make sure that you understand the whole chapter. Once you have understood the entire chapter, it will be way easier for you to write the extracts. When the extracts are given to you, you shall be able to explain them. Also, you shall easily be able to attempt your answer in brief, answer in detail. It's very easy for you because you will have mastered your chapter. You will have understood every word, every line. So yes, I know it's very difficult, probably tedious to sit and read, but they are very interesting stories. So let's get on to this beautiful journey, and I'm sure you're going to benefit to the max. So let's begin with the very first chapter. The very first chapter from Hornbill, and that is The Portrait of a Lady by Khushwant Singh. So let's see, before we move on, let's talk first about the author. Let's know a little about the background of the author before we get on to the story. Khushwant Singh, also known as Kushal Singh, was an Indian author, lawyer, diplomat, journalist and politician. So many feathers to his hat. He was born in Hadali, Punjab, British India, which is now Pakistan, and his experiences with the partition of India in 1947 drove him to write some of the most provocative and admired English language fiction and non-fiction in post-World War II India. Now, because he experienced throughout, he was there during this freedom time, the independence time, that is the time he got a lot of inspiration to write everything about during the, post-World War II. Now, let's first move on to the plot of the story. Let's just understand what the story is all about. Yeah, so the plot. The Portrait of a Lady is the story of the author. He describes his relationship with his grandmother over the years. He explains her appearance as in how she would look, which helps create an image in the reader's mind. That's you and me. We are going to read it. He pens down her daily activities and how she evolved as a character as time passed by. Seems to be really interesting. At such an age also she evolved, right? She kept changing with the time. So yeah, he has penned down, he has written it down. Let's also please catch up on our vocabulary. It's very important. See, it's not about just just wearing your branded clothes. It's all about having a branded tongue. So when you catch up with the vocabulary, you will communicate, you will also write good English, you will write better English, you will write sophisticated English. This vocabulary shall also help you to enhance your creative writing, your writing skills. See, this is very important because now you will have, creative writing skills for, a lot of marks. This should not, let you lose those marks. So this will enhance your writing and also fetch you more marks. At the same time, your communication skills will go way better. So trust me for this. Every vocabulary that we come across, look, you have the meanings right here. So it becomes very easy for you to connect, right? So please just go with the flow and get the max. Let's begin. My grandmother, like everybody's grandmother, was an old woman. She had been old and wrinkled for 20 years that I had known her. Wrinkled, we all know, creases due to old age. You get those wrinkles here. Yeah. People said that she had once been young and pretty and had even had a husband, but that was hard to believe. Now he says, I knew her for 20 years. For the 20 years that he must have lived with her, he knew her. For that he had known her. People said that she had been young and pretty. Now he has the image of her being old. He has seen her with wrinkles always. So he cannot imagine, he cannot take the idea of her being young and pretty as well. But yes, he was told by people that your grandma was once really young and pretty. And honestly, she had a husband which he could not digest, which was hard to believe for him. My grandfather's portrait hung above the mantelpiece in the drawing room. Portrait, we know, is a drawing, a painting, a photograph, just like we saw right with the title, that was a portrait. Above the mantelpiece. Now, mantelpiece is a structure of wood, marble or stone above and around a fireplace. We see it quite often in movies as well, where they have the fireplace and on top they have some picture. So yeah, his grandfather's picture was there. Portrait was there. How was he? He wore a big turban. A turban is what? Head covering made of cloth. Now, this was during the time of Punjab, so you can understand the pagdi, the turban, and loose-fitting clothes. His long white beard covered the best part of his chest, and he looked at least 100 years old. He was that old. He did not look the sort of a person who would have a wife or children. Well, that was that man's personality. His grandfather's personality was such that somewhere the author felt that he did not look that he has a family, wife or children. He looked as if he could only have lots and lots of grandchildren. So he was that very elderly type, the very elderly look. So that gave a feel that, okay, he can have grandchildren, but he having his own family somehow was not getting the connect. As for my grandmother being young and pretty, the thought was almost revolting. Now, he thinking of his grandma as young, as pretty, having a very pleasant look, was somehow revolting. Why? It was hard to believe. Why was the case? She often told us of the games she used to play as a child. Now, see, grandmas are all about stories. Grandmas are all about their experiences. And anyways, we are aware that, grandmas love to talk. So yes, they do, they share with you everything that they, hamare zamane mein aise hota tha, those types. Yes. So, this is how she would do. She often told us of the games she used to play as a child that seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables of the prophets she used to tell us. Now, imagine a grandma telling, oh, I used to play hide and seek. And so, you obviously find it very vague because you cannot connect it to her personality in the current situation. Right now, the way she is, and now imagining that person as a child is, sort of an absurd thing. So, yeah, it was very absurd. It was very illogical and undignified, somehow very foolish. There was no dignity, no respect sort of thing on her part. Now, obviously, as a child, as at that age, we are all, up to our, all fun is all, and that's all there for us. So she was sort of the same types. Now, childhood days are different for all of us. That seemed quite absurd and undignified on her part, and we treated it like the fables. Now, fables are what? they're short story conveying a moral. You generally have stories which give you some message. They convey some moral value. Of the prophets, she used to tell us, prophets are the inspired teachers, right? So she used to tell us that. So somehow when she told us about her childhood, we took that also as a story which conveyed a lesson. That's how we treated it. She had always been short and fat and slightly bent. Her face was a crisscross of wrinkles running from everywhere to everywhere. Now, she was pretty old. She was extremely old. So, obviously, the skin is definitely going to have a lot of wrinkles. No, we were certain she had always been as we had known her. She had always been like this, from the time we got into our senses, the time we have started actually really seeing her, we've seen her in wrinkles. Old, so terribly old that she could not have grown older and had stayed at the same age for 20 years. Now the author says, look, from the time I saw her, from the time I got into my senses and I started really, seeing her, until day, 20 years, I feel she's just the same. She had grown old to the max. Beyond that, she couldn't grow older. So I remember seeing her, what I saw her first, and today also if I compare it after 20 years, she still looks just the same. She could never have been pretty, but she was always beautiful. Well, to what we know pretty and beautiful are synonyms. We know they are all the same. But beautiful is when you possess beauty, right? When you attract people with your beauty, that's beautiful. But what is pretty? Pretty is when you have that very pleasant look on your face. Now that's the difference. There's a subtle difference between the two. So yes, let's get to know more about it. So the next time you want to admire a girl, you know what to use. You know whether to use pretty or beautiful. You get it right? Okay. So let's move on. So she hobbled about the house in spotless white with one hand resting on her waist to balance her stoop and the other telling the beads of her rosary. Now, she hobbled about the house. She walked in an awkward way. Now, obviously, she was short, she was fat, and she was a little bent. She was slightly bent. You know how it is, the posture of an old person. So, yeah, she walked around in that house. She was always dressed in white. Most of talking about the Hindu culture, talking about the Indian culture, generally we find our senior citizens, if I talk of ladies, one white signifies that they are widows, right? But most of the time they were into that plain color, that white color, most of the senior citizens that you come across. So yeah, she would walk around with her hand resting on her waist, obviously because she was, she had that bent, she needed that support to balance her stoop. Her stoop is that bent, and the other telling the beads of rosary. Telling the beads of rosary as in she would keep reciting, she would keep chanting. Most of them do that. They keep chanting the rosary and they keep counting and chanting both. Her silver locks were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face, and her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. Now, what do you mean by the silver locks? Silver locks are the part of the hair that coils, Now, very untidily, her silver is not silver, but yeah, grey hair, white hair. She's an old lady. She wouldn't color her hair. So, they called it silver hair. They were scattered untidily over her pale, puckered face. Puckered is gathered into wrinkles. Now you see there are so many synonyms we are coming across for wrinkles, right? Different ways to put it rather. So her puckered face, a puckered face is a face full of wrinkles. And her lips constantly moved in inaudible prayer. So basically, if whatever you are chanting, maybe Ram Ram, Om Namah Shivaya, whatever you are chanting, so it would go in inaudible. She would tell it to herself. Her lips would move, but there would be no voice. Silently, she would do the prayer all the time. Yes, she was beautiful. She was like the winter landscape in the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, breathing peace and contentment. Now, see how he talks, how he describes his grandma. You need to know these words. Surely it can come as answer in brief. So please understand this. Yes, she was beautiful. Now he's comparing his grandma to the winter, right? She was like the winter landscape. Landscape is what? Landscape is, when you have the entire scenery in front of you, the mountains, the river, the trees, everything all right in front of you, that whole thing is called the landscape. So if we are calling it the winter landscape, obviously you know how it is in winter. In the mountains, an expanse of pure white serenity, meaning depicting, showing the calm, relaxed and beautiful character of the grandmother. She was that beautiful, she was that serene, she was that calm. They are very, very sorted and composed people, right? Breathing peace and contentment. So whenever she lived with all the peace, she was at peace of mind, and contentment means a lot of satisfaction, happiness. See, there are some old people who are very grumpy. They keep cribbing all the time. It's always said, that bacha buddha ek saman. In the sense, your elderly, your senior citizens behave just like the children. You have to literally take care of them just like you take care of the children. They're very grumpy, they are moody. But here, in this case, the author's grandma was really calm. She was happy. She was a very satisfied person. She did not have any regrets, any repents. She was just at peace. Very peaceful lady. My grandmother and I were good friends. Wow. See, in spite of having that such a long generation gap, they were very good friends. My parents left me with her when they went to live in the city, and we were constantly together. Now, he was left by his parents. Probably they had to go to the city to earn their living, right? To earn money. So they left him with her. They left the author with the grandmother. She used to wake me up in the morning and get me ready for school. Now, obviously, it was her responsibility to make sure that he went to school. She said her morning prayer in a monotonous sing-song while she bathed and dressed me, in the hope that I would listen and get to know it by heart. I listened because I loved her voice, but never bothered to learn it. The naughty one. Yes. So, grandmas have that thing that constantly what the children hear every day. Now, every day if you listen to one song, eventually you know that song. You start singing that song because you know the lyrics. Why? Because of the repetition. Yeah, you keep repeatedly listening to it. So the grandma played the trick here. She said, okay, while she would dress him, while she would give him a bath, that continues, that same monotonous, repetitive, same mode, in the same tone, she would keep singing that whatever prayer she had, she would keep singing it with the hope that, okay, the same words are falling in his ears, he would listen and probably he would by heart, even he would follow the same prayers, even he would recite the same prayers. Now, she was doing it with that hope, but the author was way smarter. Yeah, he undoubtedly loved her voice, but yes, he did not listen to it. He would hear it. What's the difference between hear and listen, right? So he would hear it. Why? Because he loved her voice. Now, then she would fetch my wooden slate, which she had already washed and plastered with yellow chalk, a tiny earthen ink pot, and a red pen, tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. Now remember, he was going to school. Now that was not the time, the era of iPads and books like we use today. Then it was different. So what all would he carry? He would carry a wooden slate which she had already washed and plastered. Plastered as in covered with a layer of plaster. Now that yellow thing, it was plastered with yellow chalk. And a tiny earthen ink pot. Earthen means it is made of fire clay, like earthen pots you get, those earthen pots. And a red pen. She would tie them all in a bundle and hand it to me. Now this was the so-called stationery which he would carry to school. After a breakfast of a thick, stale chapati with a little butter and sugar spread on it, we went to school. Now that was his breakfast. It was no longer fresh, it was a stale, it was a leftover chapati maybe of the previous night. So morning she did not have that much time. Now she was old, so obviously she couldn't cope up like mother would have. But yeah, she gave him that. She spread some butter on it with little sugar on it, and that was his breakfast. She carried several stale chapatis with her for the village dogs. Now first she would feed her grandson, and then the extra chapatis she would carry for the village dogs. She would feed the dogs also when she went to drop him to school. My grandmother always went to school with me because the school was attached to the temple. Now, you know, she used to do two things at one time. One, she used to go with him so that she could drop him to school. At the same time, she would visit the temple. The priest taught us the alphabet and the morning prayer. He would teach us, the priest would teach us all that we are supposed to say, all the prayers, all about it. While the children sat in rows on either side of the veranda singing the alphabet or the prayer in a chorus, my grandmother sat inside reading the scriptures. Now, what are we talking about? Now, here we are saying that they sat in either side of the veranda, both the sides of the veranda, the children would sit and they would sing the alphabet, whatever the mantra, and the prayer in a chorus. In a chorus means all would do it together, all would sing together. And while we used to do that, my grandmother used to sit inside reading the scriptures. Now, scriptures, we know, sacred writings or books, right? She would keep reading those holy books. When we had both finished, we would walk back together. Now, she used to attend her school sort of, and while he would go to his. For her, the school was temple, obviously. Now, this time, the village dogs would meet us at the temple door. They followed us to our home, growling and fighting with each other for the chapatis we threw to them. Now, this was a daily routine. This was a daily thing. So even the dogs, you know, once you start doing it, they are just there because they know that you are going to feed them. So yes, they would also follow them home, growling, fighting with each other for the chapatis. You know, they would all want more of the chapatis. So yes. When my parents were comfortably settled in the city, they sent for us. They sent for us as in now they had settled. They actually settled themselves, established their business, whatever job, work, whatever they were doing, they were well settled. And finally, then they called for grandma and the author. They said, now you guys can come to the city. That was a turning point in our friendship. What do you mean by a turning point? The time at which a decisive change occurs. Now, because they both were together, they had a very good bond. They had a very nice bond. They were, you know, they were friends. They would behave like friends. They would enjoy like friends. But now, when this time came, when they had to go to the city, when they had to go to the parents, right? That was a time when things had a big change. What was the change? Let's watch. Although we shared the same room, my grandmother no longer came to school with me. Now they were in the city. Now how could she handle the rustle bustle of the traffic? You know, she was okay in the village because they would walk to and fro. They would go to school, they would come back together. But here it was not possible for her to take him. I used to go to an English school in a motor bus. So obviously, she had no role to play. She definitely could not take him to school. There were no dogs in the streets, and she took to feeding sparrows in the courtyard of our city house. Now, there she had the habit of feeding dogs. Here, there were no such stray dogs. So what she started, she moved over. She started feeding sparrows in the courtyard. In the courtyard means the unroofed area completely or partially enclosed by walls. Now just outside their house, they had this nice, empty space where she would feed the sparrows. As the years rolled by, we saw less of each other. Now as the time went, as the years passed by, it so happened that we were not that equally, that emotionally connected like before as in the village. of course, he started growing, he started having his own work, his own studies, and whereas she started getting aloof. They actually got a little separate from each other. They saw less of each other. For some time, she continued to wake me up and get me ready for school. When they came, to the city, immediately she couldn't have stopped. She had the grandson, the grandma, that bond is always there. When I came back, she would ask me what the teacher had taught me. She even would ask him at least that okay, what did you learn in school today? I would tell her English words and little things of Western science and learning, the law of gravity, Archimedes' principle, the world being round, etc. This made her unhappy. Why? Why was she unhappy? He was learning, he was growing, but these things were not according to her. I mean, she felt this is not what he should be learning. So she was not really happy with what he learnt in school. I mean, that was the time, that was the need of the hour. He was learning what he was supposed to, but it was not in her curriculum. It was not according to her syllabus. So obviously, she was unhappy. She could not help me with my lessons, obviously, because she did not understand what could she explain. She did not believe in the things they taught at the English school and was distressed that there was no teaching about God and the scriptures. Now, she was distressed as in she was suffering from sorrow. She did not like the idea. What was her curriculum? Her curriculum was all about God. Remember in school what he would do? He would go and chant the mantras. He would, recite prayers and they would go back. He was very connected, closely connected to God. He was getting those, those layers of, foundation over there. But here there was no holy connect. He was getting all English lessons. And she felt, what is this? Is this what he is supposed to learn? And he is not supposed to learn anything holy, nothing connected to God. So she did not like it. She did not like it one bit. One day I announced that we were being given music lessons. She was very disturbed. Now, why was she disturbed? He was getting music lessons, but her perception, her mind thought, her way of thinking about music was way different. What was it? To her, music had lewd associations. What do you mean by lewd associations? Indecent or obscene. She felt it is not for the decent people. Music is not for them. It was the monopoly of harlots and beggars and not meant for gentle folk. What did she think was that music was the monopoly. It was exclusively possessed by the harlots. Harlots here means the prostitutes. The prostitutes and beggars. She said it is for those category of people, music. It is not for the gentle folk, means people of noble birth. She said it's not for us. Why are you learning music? It's not for us. It is for those beggars and prostitutes. It's definitely not belonging to the people of the noble birth. Well, that was his curriculum. That was his syllabus. So he went on. When I went up to university, I was given a room of my own. The common link of friendship was snapped. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation. Now, obviously, as years rolled by, the author grew up. Next, he headed to the university. Okay, first it was the village. From the village, he came to the city. So there was schooling there. Next, he headed to the university. Now, when he went there, he was given a room. Now, university, that means he had to go and stay away from his house. He had to go and stay over there because he was given a room there. Now, what was the common link of friendship, that bond, that connection between him and his grandma was snapped. It was cut off. It actually broke. My grandmother accepted her seclusion with resignation, as in she accepted a lonely life without objections. She did not utter a word. She was quiet. You remember, she was a very satisfied, a very content lady. So she said, she just let it go on. She went with the flow. She had no objections. She did not tell him, don't go to the university. She was okay with it. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. Now, she had the household machine for spinning yarn. She was continuously doing that. Now, see, these people don't really help you in your household work. I mean, it's not even right to make them work, right? So they need to be occupied in some manner or the other. They need to be busy because we are all aware that empty mind is devil's workshop. So obviously she had to be busy in some way or the other. So this is how she would keep herself busy. She rarely left her spinning wheel to talk to anyone. She was using that spinning wheel, that machine, right? It was a household machine basically. So just to keep her busy, she would do that, because you remember, we have to keep them occupied. We definitely, cannot leave them because they cannot do any other tedious work. So something that keeps them occupied, because we are all aware that empty mind is a devil's workshop. So it's good to keep them busy. So she kept herself busy with that spinning wheel. From sunrise to sunset, she sat by her spinning wheel and reciting prayers. Now, obviously, they don't have that physical strength in their body. So she would sit and do just one thing, like physically, she would do the spinning wheel, and otherwise she was, lost in reciting her prayers. Only in the afternoon, she relaxed for a while to feed the sparrows. You remember, there it was the dogs, here they were the sparrows. While she sat in the veranda, breaking the bread into little bits, hundreds of little birds collected round her, creating a veritable bedlam of chirrupings. Now, what do you mean by veritable? A very considerable scene of uproar. Now here, they would all, now just imagine her, throwing the pieces of bread and all the birds coming, the sparrows obviously, and the chirrupings, the chirping sound coming. So that was the scene created at that point of time. Some came and perched on her legs. They came and they literally sit on something at a considerable height. So they came and perched on her legs, others on her shoulders. Some even sat on her head. They had become so friendly. They had become so used to her, feeding bread, that they sort of had become friends, They used to go and sit around her, on her. She smiled, but she never shooed them away. She did not drive them away. She just smiled and she would enjoy her time with them. It used to be the happiest half hour of the day for her. She would enjoy it to the full. She would really enjoy feeding them, and she had the best time. She found a lot of happiness by feeding the sparrows. When I decided to go abroad, now do you see, layer by layer, time by time, first it was village, then it was school in the city, then it was the university, and now he finally travels to go abroad, right? So, when I decided to go abroad for further studies, I was sure my grandmother would be upset. She wouldn't definitely like the idea. I would be away for 5 years. And at her age, one could never tell. One could never tell what? Yes, you never know when she might breathe her last. So she was an aged lady now. 5 years is a big time. You don't even know what's going to happen in the next moment. But obviously he went with the thing that maybe he's seeing her physically for the very last time. But my grandma could. She was not even sentimental. She was not even emotional. She actually took it very bravely. She came to leave me at the railway station, but did not talk or show any emotion. Her lips moved in prayer as always, that inaudible prayer, that silent prayer. Her mind was lost in prayer. Her fingers were busy telling the beads of her rosary, counting and reciting. So generally it's that 108 beads of the rosary, that mala we call it. Yes. Silently she kissed my forehead, and when I left, I cherished the moist imprint as perhaps the last sign of physical contact between us. Now, anybody would have thought, obviously nobody wants that to happen, but because we know they are aged, anything is possible at any time. So it's a universal fact. Everybody knows it, right? So she kissed his forehead, and when I left, I really valued that moist imprint. When she kissed him on his forehead, that moist imprint, the mark or the the impression that was created, he felt perhaps that was the last sign. The thing that she kissed on his forehead was the last sign of physical contact between us. But that was not so. Oh, she even went on for the next 5 years, good and strong. After 5 years, I came back home and was met by her at the station. She was still in that condition that she could come and receive him at the station. She did not look a day older. You remember, he always felt that she has remained the same. She has grown old to the maximum. She cannot go beyond that. She still had no time for words, and while she clasped me in her arms, I could hear her reciting her prayers. Now, when she took him, when she actually held him tightly, he came back after 5 years, her grandson. She held him tightly in her arms, but at the same time, her prayers were continuously on. Even on the first day of my arrival, her happiest moments were with her sparrows, whom she fed longer, and with frivolous rebukes. What do you mean by that? He says, even I got back, that was my first day after 5 years, but still her happiness was lying with her sparrows. She fed longer and with frivolous rebukes, as in light-hearted scoldings. She would, actually talk. She was enjoying that beautiful time with the sparrows. That is how it went for her. In the evening, a change came over her. What happened? She did not pray. Do you think it goes with it? How can she not pray? She was doing it 24/7. She collected the women of the neighborhood, got an old drum, and started to sing. Now it was a little different. For several hours, she thumped the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum and sang of the homecoming of warriors. Now, actually, she was rejoicing the comeback of her grandson. So what she did was, she was thumping the sagging skins of the dilapidated drum, as in she was actually hitting, she was playing the drum. You know that dholak we say? Yes, she was doing that. The dilapidated drum means the loose surface of a worn out. The drum was actually not really in that great position, but yeah, she did it. And she did it for several hours, and she sang of the homecoming of warriors. We had to persuade her to stop, to avoid overstraining. We said, enough, don't go on, like it doesn't go with your age. That was the first time since I had known her that she did not pray. This was the only moment where she did not pray, and she started playing the drum and she was singing the welcome songs. The next morning, she was taken ill. She fell ill. It was a mild fever, and the doctor told us that it would go. He says, don't worry, it's just fever, it will go. But my grandmother thought differently. She told us that her end was near. It quite often happens that these people, they get to know. Somehow that instinct tells them that, okay, now we are nearing the end. They give you signals. She said that since only a few hours before the close of the last chapter of her life, she had omitted to pray. She was not going to waste any more time talking to us. We protested, but she ignored our protests. She said, you know what, now this is just literally the last chapter of my life, and this was that only moment where I had not prayed. When, you remember when she was thumping the drum, that was the time she had not prayed. So she told them, she said, imagine now that's the last chapter of my life, which is also going to close. And that is the time I had not said my prayers. I had not recited my prayers. She had omitted, that means she had missed it. She was not going to waste time talking to her. She said, look, now y'all don't talk to me. Just let me be alone. Let me go on with my prayers. We protested. We disagreed. We said, it's okay. That's not a big deal. But she ignored our protest. She said, she just ignored it. She did not go. She was back to her prayers. She lay peacefully in bed, praying and telling her beads. Telling her beads again. She was doing her rosary. Even before we could suspect, her lips stopped moving. You remember her lips used to continuously move. So suddenly, before we could even think of anything, her lips stopped moving and the rosary fell from her lifeless fingers. The scene, the time had come. A peaceful pallor spread on her face and we knew that she was dead. Pallor as in an unhealthy or a pale appearance on her face. Obviously, she had given up. She had breathed her last. So they all knew, obviously, when the rosary fell from her hands, her lips stopped moving, her face became pale. Obviously, all signs that she was no longer there. We lifted her off the bed and, as is customary, laid her on the ground and covered her with a red shroud. Now, as is the Hindu custom, we generally don't keep dead bodies on the bed. So what we do is we immediately put them on the ground. Now, it's a custom, it's a tradition which we've been doing. So a custom is according to the customs, and they covered her with a red shroud. Red shroud is a cloth to cover a dead person. After a few hours of mourning, expressing grief, sorrow, we left her alone to make arrangements for her funeral. Now, that time everyone crying, expressing sorrow. Finally, they had to leave her because now they had to prepare for her funeral. For the funeral is a ceremony for cremation. In the evening, we went to her room with a crude stretcher to take her to be cremated. With a crude stretcher as in a very improper stretcher, just, somehow we managed that stretcher to take her to be cremated as in to burn the body. The sun was setting and had lit her room and veranda with a blaze of golden light. Now, this was the atmosphere at that point of time. We stopped halfway in the courtyard. Why did they stop in the courtyard? Do you remember? She was in love with the sparrows. All over the veranda and in her room, right up to where she lay dead and stiff, wrapped in the red shroud, thousands of sparrows sat scattered on the floor. There was no chirruping. Wow. Do you see the connect? Do you see the bond? Even if it is with birds, even if it is with animals, even they understood that she is no longer there. Even they were expressing their grief through silence. There was no chirruping. They were not chirping at all. And thousands of them had gathered because she had made that bond with them. With those pieces of bread, she had won their hearts. Even they are now sad that she has passed away. We felt sorry for the birds, and my mother fetched some bread for them. She broke it into little crumbs, the way my grandmother used to, and threw it to them. The sparrows took no notice of the bread. Just imagine. They were so connected. I'm literally getting goosebumps while I'm telling you this. I hope you are feeling the same. You're visualizing the same. The mother, she actually felt, okay, maybe they are hungry because she used to feed them, the grandma. So she did the same in the very same method, in the very same way. She made the crumbs of the bread. She put it to the birds. But do you understand? They did not even touch it. They were just there. Though she put the bread in front of them, they did not touch. Why? Because they were in grief. They were in sorrow. They did not take any notice of the bread. When we carried my grandmother's corpse off, when they took the dead body, they flew away quietly. Wow, you can see that strong connect. When they took away the dead body of the grandma, these sparrows just flew away quietly. They did not touch the bread. Next morning, the sweeper swept the breadcrumbs into the dustbin. Even after they took the corpse, the sparrows expressed their pain, their sorrow, their grief through silence. They did not touch the bread. Their hunger had sort of disappeared because they were missing grandma. They did not want the bread. They wanted that love, that connect with the grandma, and they knew now they will no longer ever get the same. Yeah, that brings us to the end of such a wonderful, such a touching story. Tells us loneliness is never more cruel than when it is felt in close propinquity with someone who has ceased to communicate. Loneliness actually comes to you. Now here she was lonely, right? She went on getting far from her grandson. School, city, college, university, abroad. Every time she went on getting far and far from her grandson. Now that was the loneliness that actually really sort of, made her all by herself. She had no objections to the same, but yes, there was less of, it was ceased to communicate. There was less communication with her and her grandson. So this is what they're telling you. Loneliness is never more cruel. It can be the most cruelest when someone really close to you stops communicating with you. So there, students, don't you stop the communication with us. Keep our communication going really strong. As we explain, you hear, you understand, you score marks. And for the same, keep watching and keep learning.